For critical information ignored by the mainstream media, log on to davidicke.com/headlines now.
Broadcasting live from the great city of Manchester, England. This is the Richie Allen Show on davidicke.com.
Good morning to you. How are you? It is Sunday, the 15th of May, 2016. I hope you're well. I hope you're well. The programme is brought to you in association, Sunday View that is, with davidicke.com/headlines. Always a good idea to have davidicke.com/headlines to hand to see great analysis of many of the stories I'll be covering with you over pretty much most of the next hour. I never time it very well. It'll be 54 minutes or 62 minutes. It'll be something like that. But there's a lot to get through today. Delighted that you've joined me. Thank you for getting out of bed on, it's a changeable old Sunday morning. It's been a glorious weekend. Friday, Saturday, glorious days. Started off lovely this morning. I was up at 5:30 out with the dog. Glorious, glorious, glorious Sunday morning. But it's getting a bit chilly now and I think it's going to turn. So, you can't have everything, can you? So thanks for getting out of bed and tuning in. Welcome and tweet the programme and get involved. It sounds kind of patronising that, but I don't mean it to be patronising. Tweet me your opinions. Whether it's a story I'm covering or not, if you've got something to tell me, tweet at Richie Allen Show and I'll quite happily read out your tweets, or email richie@richieallen.co.uk. I've got the email open as well. And I know you've got plenty to say, so share it with me and share it with our listeners today. I want to mention, as I mentioned, David, and I'm going to keep mentioning this. You know that David is in London on June the 18th, and it was due to be at Shepherd's Bush Empire Theatre, but because of work that's going to overrun on the theatre, they've moved it to the Brixton Academy O2, the O2 Brixton Academy, I should say, which is a bigger venue, which is a good thing because some tickets have become available, more tickets because it holds more people. But they are going quickly. And I would advise you, and they really are going quickly, if you do want to see David in London, don't leave it too long. Go to davidicke.com for all the details there. All right? I'm going to be on the Isle of Wight on the 5th of June. Is it the 4th or the 5th? I think it's the 5th. But because I'm an idiot, I'm half an idiot anyway, I'm just going to have a look at my calendar there, make sure I've got the date right. I was wrong, of course. I'm always wrong. It's the 4th of June. So I'll be at the warm-up event on the Isle of Wight on the 4th of June, so that I'll be able to review it then on the following Monday's programme. I'm looking forward to being on the Isle of Wight for a couple of days. So if you're going to be on the Isle of Wight, and if you have a ticket, those tickets are gone. They're sold out. But if you are going to be there, look me up after the event or before the event and we'll have a chat. I will be recording people's thoughts, how they felt after watching the talk, which lasts for just over 10 hours, amazingly. So there you are. Right, loads to get through. Loads and loads and loads and loads to get through. So I'm just going to start by, as usual, having a quick run through the Sunday papers. That's what I do. This is an opinion programme. I don't generally interview people on it, although last week, was it last week or was it the week before, Gilad Atzmon was on with me. I think it was the previous week, wasn't it? Was it? Time flies. But I'll do that again, I suppose, in the future. So good morning to you, and let's crack on with it now. So, the newspaper, which is getting most coverage on breakfast radio and television programmes today, is the Sunday Telegraph, because they, on their front page, have a story about Boris Johnson, not only on the Sunday Telegraph, but on many other Sunday newspapers as well. Johnson basically saying that the European Union is pursuing a similar goal to Hitler and Napoleon, in that it's trying to create a powerful European super state. That's in the Sunday Telegraph. And as I said, it's been picked up by a lot of other newspapers as well. Also in the Sunday Telegraph, there's an article about the Queen's speech, which we will hear this coming Wednesday, with predictions of announcements, not only on the UK space industry, but also on driverless cars, which is very interesting, and adoption. They want to fast-track children whom are in care at the moment into permanent adoption. Now, I'll tell you more about that a bit later on in this programme. You'll know by now, if you're a regular listener to the Richie Allen radio show Monday to Thursday, that forced adoption secret family courts is something that gets a lot of coverage on the programme and will continue to get a lot of coverage in the future because it's so serious. So that's the Sunday Telegraph there, a nonsense story on the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. You wonder what goes through the minds of these editors, but some bookmakers apparently have suspended betting on Tom Hiddleston, whom I believe is an actor. I've never seen him in anything, but he's apparently going to be the next James Bond. The Sunday Telegraph thinking that's very important and that you should know that. Why are you mentioning it then, Richie? I hear you cry. That just drives me mad. The Sunday Times, David Cameron is in the Sunday Times and allegedly has said he will not seek a third term as British Prime Minister and that he believes Boris Johnson is the current favourite to succeed him. Now, the Sunday Times quotes several senior Tories but doesn't name any of them. Also in the Sunday Times today is a story I haven't read, but it's a story that says the BBC is too Christian in its output and must diversify. You'll know that big changes are planned for and will be enforced on the BBC. You'll know that the government gets to select half the governors. Yeah, it is the governors, isn't it? To oversee the BBC's output and oversee the running of the BBC. People fearing this week that it really spells doom for the impartiality of the BBC. I mentioned on the Richie Allen radio show in the week, it's my opinion that for a long time the BBC has been an apologist and a propaganda wing, an apologist for and a propaganda wing for the state and the institutions of the state, so it won't make any difference. I don't have a television licence, I don't watch the BBC, and I don't, when I do watch it, it's for the purposes of criticism and for using sound bites for this programme, but I don't watch it, and I never will. My opinion. What else is on the Sunday Times? Nothing really of any interest. The Sunday Mail runs with the story that the leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, has backed Boris Johnson's bid to succeed Cameron, following on from The Times. The Times didn't quote anybody by name, but the Sunday Mail are saying that Farage has said that should a UK vote to quit the European Union see off Cameron, because he would resign, according to the Sunday Mail, if British men and women vote on the 23rd to leave the European Union. The Mail on Sunday are reporting that Farage has said he wouldn't rule out a scenario where he could work with the former London mayor. Now, I haven't read that story in any depth. I'm not sure whether Farage is not ruling out returning to the Conservative Party under the leadership of Boris Johnson. I don't know. That's in the Sunday Mail. The Sunday Observer runs the story that the headline is "Every household told sign up now to vote in historic EU poll." The Observer says 28 million households are to be targeted in a mass campaign to encourage people to vote in the referendum after David Cameron warned of terrible economic consequences if the UK votes to leave. We'll come back to the scaremongering and the fearmongering by the British Prime Minister and by the Bank of England and by the IMF. We'll come back to that in a minute. Also in the Sunday Observer, care for children with mental health problems is woeful, say doctors. Now, the breakfast television programmes have been all over that story this morning. Some parents whose children have been sectioned, and Sky News had a woman on today whose child has autism and who has epilepsy and has bipolar as well, terrible afflictions the child is suffering with. But he's been put into an institution 300 miles away from her home, his home. She has to travel 300 miles. That's a 600-mile round trip to go and see him. Unbelievable to think of children with psychological problems being sent to mental health institutions. I think it's absolutely incredible. That's a story on the Sunday Observer. If you want to read that, it's free. You can read it online. And the Sunday Express runs with this story. Now, this is something I covered extensively at the People's Voice in London. And I'm amazed we're still talking about statins. The government, the British government, is to pay for a £1 million trial of the cholesterol-lowering drug statins. And that's according to the Sunday Express. In fact, I'm going to read you the story. I'm going to read you some of this story. You're going to be shocked by it. Some of you will be shocked by it. Some of you won't be shocked by it because you'll know that this goes on. Let me scroll down there. A £1 million trial of the controversial heart drug statins is to be paid for by the government following concerns over their safety. The news comes as separate research uncovered by the Sunday Express shows, wait for it, doctors have been overestimating the risk of heart attacks and strokes in patients and prescribing the drugs to those who do not need them. I should read that paragraph again. Now, this isn't news to me, not because I'm a know-all, I've been covering this a long time, but it might be news to you. Separate research uncovered by the Sunday Express shows that doctors have been overestimating the risk of heart attacks and strokes in patients and prescribing the drugs to those who don't need them. That's a crime. That's a crime of gargantuan proportions. That's a crime that should result in the imprisonment of doctors suspected to be doing that. They should be investigated. If there's evidence to prosecute, they should be prosecuted and they should go to prison. Now, the trial, funded by a grant from the National Institute of Health Research, comes after doctors have warned that the side effects of the drugs, which include severe muscle pain, depression, fatigue, diabetes, impaired memory and stroke, outweigh the benefits. Well, duh. Again, this isn't news. And David Icke's been all over this. All over this. Lot on this in The Perception Deception by David, I remember when I read that. It is the most commonly prescribed treatment in the UK right now, statins. And recent recommendations increase the number of those eligible to take the drugs to around 1 in 4 adults or 12 million people. Are you awake yet? Can you see what's going on here? Staggering, isn't it? A drug that doesn't work, that doesn't do anything for cholesterol in people, is giving people depression, fatigue, impaired memory, stroke and diabetes. Wow. Fair play to the Sunday Express, a paper which is going up in my estimation. Ordinarily, the Express is a newspaper overly concerned with weather events and the McCanns and with Diana. Some good journalism in the Sunday Express for a change. We might return to it a little bit later on. Staggering that, isn't it? Staggering that they could get away with that. The government saying, we'll put £1 million into research. The research has already been done by decent doctors, by decent microbiologists and chemists. They've already done research on statins and found that it doesn't do anything for anybody. And it's all negative. We don't need to spend £1 million more on what we know already. And again, I say again, if doctors are prescribing a drug to people that they know the person doesn't need, because those doctors are being treated to weekends away, are being treated to, the best concert tickets and great seats at the football and at the tennis, those doctors should be in jail. Jesus Christ. Wow. And the main story, back to the main story, before we move on from the paper, because I've wasted a lot of time already. The big story today, Boris Johnson, the EU wants a super state just as Hitler did. And I'm going to read you the first couple of paragraphs of that story in the Sunday Telegraph. The European Union is pursuing a similar goal to Hitler in trying to create a powerful super state, Boris Johnson says. In a dramatic interview with the Telegraph, he warns that while bureaucrats in Brussels are using different methods from the Nazi dictator, they share the aim of unifying Europe under one authority. Well, they're not using different methods. The Nazis used blitzkrieg. They stormed through Poland. They overran Czechoslovakia, didn't they? Austria. Absolutely killing everybody in sight. The methods used by the European Union and the Troika, which is the European Union, the IMF and the European Central Bank, are pretty much the same. They're killing people, but doing it slowly. See Greece, see Italy, see Spain. The Telegraph continues, but the EU's disastrous failures have fueled tensions between member states and allowed Germany to grow in power, take over the Italian economy and destroy Greece, Boris Johnson warns. Mr. Johnson invokes Winston Churchill's wartime defiance, urging the British people to be the heroes of Europe again, set the country free and save the European Union from itself by voting to leave in the referendum next month. He's been criticised across the board today for using the H word, the Hitler word, although nobody has accused him of anti-Semitism yet. Seems you can't mention Hitler anymore without offending Jewish people, Zionists. So that's the big story in the Sunday Telegraph. Interestingly enough, yesterday morning I went into Manchester City Centre and I met a couple of people. I met the Socialist Workers' Party, who were based in Market Street in Manchester, running a campaign to get people to sign a petition to say that refugees are welcome here. So I spoke to a guy there called Andy, and I said, Andy, just as a matter of interest, what if those responsible for the chaos in Syria and in Yemen and in Libya and everywhere else, what if the migrant crisis is an intended consequence of that? I actually thought, being the Socialist Worker Party, because I've had, some good and bad experiences with them before, I thought he would jump down my throat and, conspiracy theorists and all that nonsense. But he didn't. He said, well, yes, but he said, I'm still motivated by wanting to help the people in Calais and the children there and blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, fair enough, I can agree with that. I was surprised that he was prepared to listen to my argument about the intended consequences. Further down Market Street was Vote Leave, which is Boris Johnson's campaign. And I'm sure they had people all over Britain in every city and town handing out leaflets on Vote Leave. Again, I stopped, said hello, how are you, and asked them, did they know about the Nazi roots of the Brussels EU? Did they know that major industrialists and pharmaceutical companies and people whom had basically been responsible for the start of the First and Second World Wars, that they had used the European Union as a way to bring about, a single European superstate because of the failure to do that in the Second World War and World War I. All of this being historically factual. And the guy said to me, I'm not interested in any of that. And I said, okay, you're not interested in any of that, but it's the truth. That's what you should be telling the British people. Didn't want to know. What time is it? 17 minutes past the hour. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter, Richie at richieallen.co.uk. Sean tweets, how much money has been spent on secondary illness of statins? That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. And I'm sure no study has been done on that. Nobody has done a study on that. It's a really good question. Tommy B tweets, it is a fascist state run by bureaucrats which cannot be held accountable. Open trade to the world, cut off those EU shackles. And Wayne says, how you doing, Wayne? It's criminal, Richie, just more of the same treasonous behaviour of the state, big pharma and sick, malevolent behaviour of people. I mean, the doctors have a lot to answer for there. Doctors prescribing something to somebody they know, you could be, it might sound very dramatic, and I'm not trying to be melodramatic, but I would charge a doctor like that with attempted murder. Prescribing something to somebody that isn't going to do them any good, but could cause them great harm. Attempted murder. Oh yeah, with prejudice. Horrendous, isn't it? The malfeasance, the corruption, the greed. It's horrendous, is what it is. So on the European Union then, so much to get into today, and I'm mindful of the time. Mindful. I said the Sunday Express is doing some really good, it's putting out some really good articles lately. Listen to this, and get the vomit bucket ready. I've got mine right here. The vomit bucket, listen to this. Sir Reginald Adrian Berkeley Sheffield, 8th Baronet. Let me read that again. Sir Reginald Adrian Berkeley Sheffield, the 8th Baronet, receives eye-watering sums of money from Brussels to help fund the upkeep of his sprawling Lincolnshire estate. Wait for it. Sir Reginald Adrian Berkeley Sheffield, 8th Baronet, is the father of Samantha Cameron and is just one of a number of wealthy aristocrats who get huge pots of cash paid out by the European Union's Common Agricultural Policy. today, Sunday, the Sunday Express can reveal how the €58 billion scheme, which was set up to help impoverished farmers, right, is now being exploited by Britain's landed elite to bankroll their huge inherited estates. Right? This drives me mad. Because the Sunday Express have published this today, but it will not be mentioned next time David Cameron is interviewed by a journalist. Will not be mentioned. Amazingly, writes the Sunday Express, the taxpayer-funded programme is handing over hundreds of millions of pounds of our cash to rich aristocrats, fox hunting associations and local councils. The Sunday Express says that the revelation that Sir Reginald, Cameron's father-in-law, is such a large recipient will prove hugely embarrassing for Cameron, who's been accused of burying a huge conflict of interest over his leadership role to keep Britain in the European Union. And he won't be embarrassed because he will not be asked it. We don't have journalists in this country anymore. I am a journalist, and confronted with David Cameron today, I would ask him politely to explain how it is that his father-in-law, through the corrupt Common Agricultural Policy, one of the most corrupt institutions of the European Union, how is it that people, multi-millionaires, are given blank cheques, well, not blank cheques, but lots of money. In fact, he's received nearly £700,000, has multi-millionaire Sir Reginald the Asshole 8th Baronet. Imagine it. Scheme that's been running since 1999. The Sunday Express found that, in fact, Sir Reginald's companies have probably gotten about £3 million in the last 15 years, while British men and women are going to food banks. Food banks. Billionaires are given money for nothing by the European Union. Imagine it. Andrea Leadsom is a Tory MP. She was on the Andrew Marr show this morning. She's a Vote Leave representative. In fact, she's their economic spokesperson. And she was talking about the Bank of England and the IMF scaremongering. They're saying there will be an economic disaster if we leave the European Union. That's what they've been saying. So Andrea Leadsom was talking to Andrew Marr today, and I'm going to play you some of that. This is how it went.
No, it was an incredibly dangerous intervention. You know, the core job of the Bank of England is to ensure financial stability. That's it. That is their job. So to get involved with some kind of purely speculative, what might happen, what might households do, what might businesses do, that's just not inside their remit. They're not there to promote financial instability, and that's what they've done.
And you think by simply raising the question of the pound falling as a result of a Brexit vote, he has made it more likely?
Totally. This whole point, what a central banker should do is to say we have the tools to be able to deal with whatever the political decision is on June the 23rd. And if he doesn't think he has the tools, he should be privately talking to the Chancellor. What he's done instead is to come out with some nonsense which is totally unjustifiable, purely speculative stuff on what might happen in the event that we leave, and also only looking at the downside.
Now this Mark Carney Central Bank of England bullshit came from a meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee. And as Andrew Marr, the presenter, says here, you, the taxpayer, won't get to see the minutes of the meeting that led to the bullshit statement by Carney, because the minutes of the Monetary Policy Committee won't be published for 6 years, right? And you think you live in a democracy.
Now, we think, we don't know, we think the Monetary Policy Committee did discuss all of these things, but of course the full minutes are going to stay private and secret for 6 years. Do you think after this intervention we should now see those minutes published in full?
Well, I would think that the processes will remain intact, but I suspect that the governor will be significantly regretting getting involved in politics, destabilising the markets in the exact opposite to the way he should do, and I'm quite sure he will be wishing he hadn't done it.
Well, I guess when it comes to economic risk, some people will be saying, yes, it was Mark Carney, but it's also been Christine Lagarde, it's been the IMF, it's been President Obama, there's been a whole series of big voices, substantial voices, independent of British politics, who have been saying the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, there is this big institutional ganging up on the poor British voter. But the truth is, these people who are very rich, very successful, no skin in the game, and what they don't see is the poor British voter who is trying to get a decent primary school place, who's trying to get a doctor's appointment. Those are the people who are actually having to live with the consequences of being a part of this over-bloated EU bureaucracy.
Yeah, big institutions with no dog in the fight, she says. She's wrong, of course, there. She's absolutely wrong. It's an outrageous thing to say that. Those institutions involving themselves in the debate, particularly in the Vote Remain side, have no dog in the fight, and it's really going to affect the poorest. Well, it will affect the poorest people, of course. But, of course, these institutions have a big dog in the fight. The TTIP agreement is going to be problematic for the cabal, for these lunatics, if Britain decides to leave the European Union. They then get on to talking about the trade benefits or the lack of trade benefits for Britain remaining within the Union. And this is important. Pay attention to this. This is them talking about Britain's trading with the other member states within the bloc.
One of your colleagues, Sajid Javid, has written very interestingly today in the papers saying, I mean, he's described himself as a Euro-sceptic, very, very against the Euro and so forth, but the thing that has changed his mind and made him a Leave voter and a Leave campaigner is the...
Remain.
Remain,
yeah.
You're quite right, well spotted. A Remain campaigner is the single market, that when he looked at the effect of the single market, particularly on the service economy, he saw that a huge proportion of our exports depend upon it, and he determined that this was the right thing to do. He said, of the other 50 countries the EU has negotiated to deal with, not one has full access for service industries into the EU's single market.
Well, in truth, over the last 10 years, UK exports to the EU have absolutely flatlined to slightly gone backwards. The EU has been notoriously bad at intra-EU trade in services, not because there are tariffs in money terms, but because there are non-trade tariffs. So they put up boundaries and barriers to allowing UK access to the EU. So as a matter of fact, the UK has done incredibly badly out of EU trade in services. Where the EU is better is in goods, and about 70% of all intra-EU trade is in goods. So the UK has lost out big time. It's simply not true to say that if we can't get access to the EU single market, we'll be worse off.
Again, she's wrong there. She said that it isn't, or it hasn't flatlined in 10 years. The percentage of British trade with European Union member states hasn't changed since 1973. It's always been around 60%. Britain hasn't benefited in terms of increasing trade with other member states since joining the European Union. Now, this is a fact. They won't tell you this on the BBC. I don't know why she's not saying that, as somebody who is, basically a very, very important member of the Vote Leave team, because she's the economic spokeswoman, right? It's a monumental tide of bullshit. Everything is a lie. We've demonstrated on this programme, again using facts, using their own facts against them, that Britain, when it negotiates a trade deal with anybody, must get the other member states' approval before doing that deal. No talk of that on the Mar programme this morning. It's just a lie. Everything is a lie. And of course, that's why they chose Boris Johnson and Michael Gove and the other Tory MPs who are part of the Vote Leave team. That's why they chose them. They handpicked their own opposition. It's like me playing a game of five-a-side soccer and getting to choose my opposition. I'm going to choose one-legged players and players with crutches. People can't see it, or can they? It's coming up for 20 9.5 minutes to the top of the hour. You're with Sunday View in association with davidicke.com/headlines. Going to take a wee break, back with plenty more after these.
Do you want to release the full potential of your soul consciousness and find out how to experience that power in all areas of your life now? Go to livingasyoursoul.com for free guidance with in-depth how-to articles, free healing meditations of creation recordings, free soul solutions, and much, much more. livingasyoursoul.com, making the profound practical.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with davidicke.com.
Welcome back. Sunday View is live. It's terrific to be live every Sunday. It's working out really well. Thanks for your tweets. I'm going to read them in a second. Paula Allen, good morning, Paula. Paula's a friend of mine on social media. She's a UKIP supporter. In fact, her partner he's a UKIP. He's a member of UKIP. Works hard with the UK Independence Party. Good morning, Paula. Richie, there's a free public event you might mention for me. She says there's an EU referendum questions and answers event taking place at the Rendezvous Hotel in Skipton on Thursday, the 19th of May. It begins at 7:30 p.m. The speakers who will be there include Stephen Wolfe, MEP, Philip Davis, MEP, Robert Sturdy, a former MEP, and John Harris, CBE. They'll be speaking. The event has been set up for anybody to attend, says Paula. They would like people to come along and engage, have the questions that matter to them answered, and then make an informed choice on the 23rd of June. Anybody who wants to attend can find the event on Eventbrite under EU questions and answers, or email skiptoneu@yahoo.co.uk to reserve seats. That's skiptoneu@yahoo.co.uk. The event is at the Rendezvous Hotel, Skipton, Thursday, the 19th of May, 7:30 to 9 p.m. Thanks, Paula. Good to know that. And if you are at the moment, if you think that Britain should stay in the European Union, why not turn up there? You know, if you think Britain should leave, don't go there. These are people who reckon Britain should leave. So if you're undecided or think Britain should stay, well, you should go and hear from these people. Get an informed or make an informed choice. That's what I would say anyway. Good morning, Dean Smith. Richie, nothing but fear porn. If we leave the European Union, my family will be 4 million quid worse off and the planet will implode. Yes. Yeah, that's ultimately the David Cameron position. Simon McCarthy says, and they tell us they abolished slavery. Kim Erswell, good morning, Kim. Bankster, Carney's mates at Goldman Sachs were happy, Richie. Of course, Kim, of course. And Paul Alawi, how you doing, Paul? There will be an economic disaster if Britain leaves the European Union for all the titled landowners, says Paul. And Paul, I did probably a very boring rant on this programme a couple of weeks back, explaining who these titled families are and how they earned their 200 and 300 acre sprawling estates. They stole them, of course. I'm not going to go into it again. I named them, many of these people, who they are, how they got their money, how they got their land. It's a joke. Karen Kelly, good morning, Karen. The level of journalism in this country is astounding. Not journalists at all. They are establishment repeaters, more like. Yes, apart from the very good article in the Sunday Express. But nobody's going to put that to Cameron. Let's talk about your father-in-law and the millions he gets from the Common Agricultural Policy. A man who's a millionaire 50 times over already. Oh, let's move on. Good morning, Jean-Anne Crowley, by the way. How are you, Jean-Anne? Jean-Anne is asking me, have I heard of a movie called America-geddon? I've not, but I'm going to look it up. Tell me more about it. America-geddon. Sounds very interesting, that. Thanks, Gina, and good to know you're listening, by the way. We're Sunday View today. It's 26 minutes to the top of the hour. I want to talk to you about Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, I suppose, how would you describe him to somebody who never heard of him? He is very, very intelligent. No doubt about that. He wrote Manufacturing Consent, which is a very good book about the health or the lack thereof of the media and how the media came to be owned by the corporations that prop up the state. He's done a lot more than Manufacturing Consent, but that was a very good book. I really liked that book. I read it very early on in my coming to understand how the world is. He's one of the darlings of the left, I suppose. But I fear, I fear that Chomsky has become increasingly irrelevant, though, over time. Now, I interviewed him a couple of times while I was in Spain. The second time I interviewed him, he wasn't very thrilled with me because I was giving him questions about the validity of climate change. He didn't like that. And I never interviewed him a third time. Anyway, I caught Chomsky on Channel 4 News last night. He gave an interview to Cathy Newman. And I think in it, Chomsky showed just how out of touch he is with things. This is Chomsky on Channel 4 News yesterday.
Well, the greatest danger that he and indeed every Republican candidate poses is barely mentioned. It's kind of reminiscent of Sherlock Holmes's dog that did not bark. The greatest danger is there are two huge dangers that the human species faces. We're now in a situation where we have to decide whether the species survives in any decent form. One is the rising danger of nuclear war, which is quite serious. The other is environmental catastrophe. Now, on these issues, Donald Trump and the other Republican candidates are basically uniform.
Do you believe that
the threat of nuclear?
Do you believe that Hillary Clinton, the Democratic frontrunner, would champion those issues and in a way that would satisfy you?
Not in any way that would satisfy me, but at least she recognizes that climate change is going on and that we have to do something about it.
Climate change. I mean, Chomsky is a scientist, and as I said, he's based at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He must know that man-made climate change is bollocks. I can't imagine how he couldn't know that. A guy like him, he is a consumer of news, like not many people I've ever interviewed. Remember speaking to him about that. Like his friend Norman Finkelstein spends all his time reading everything. And I don't just mean, what we would call mainstream publications. He reads everything. He must know it's bollocks, Chomsky. And the idea is that Clinton is, somehow more palatable than Trump. Again, he must know that's bollocks. Anyway, Newman, the presenter, is lazy. Like most mainstream presenters, they know nothing. They don't even know the lies, let alone the truth. They're so unashamedly lazy, these presenters. She goes on to suggest to Chomsky that he agrees with Trump on Britain leaving the European Union and that he, Chomsky, has been critical of EU bureaucracy. She's lazy and she's completely uninformed.
No, I don't. In fact, I actually have no real strong opinion on Brexit, but my concern about it would be that it would weaken the European Union, but it would also probably leave Britain even more, don't want to use too strong a word, subordinate to U.S. power than it is today, which I don't think would be a good thing for the world or Britain.
So leaving the European Union would make Britain more subordinate to US power. Clueless. Clueless again. Chomsky will know who the architects of the European Union project were. Said this earlier on when talking about Boris Johnson. They're creating blocks, NAFTA, binding the US, Canada and Mexico, the European Union, which binds European countries and aims to ultimately have every country in Europe in the European Union. then factor in the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and TTIP, the Trans-Atlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, agreements which will bind the European superstate and Eurasia to NAFTA, to the US, Mexico and Canada. One world government. Surely Chomsky knows this. But then again, Chomsky rubbished those who were asking questions about 9/11, didn't he? Famously. He's then asked about Russia, is Chomsky. The context is that Chomsky has always called the United States a terrorist state. So Newman asks him about Russia, and his answer is interesting.
How I describe Russia? Authoritarian, brutal, harsh, carrying out ugly actions in its own region. The United States, on the other hand, carries out such actions all over the world. In fact, again, look at there are serious confrontations between Russia and the United States. And once again, are they on the Mexican border, the Canadian border? No, they're on the Russian border. In fact, right at the point of the traditional invasion route through which Russia has been virtually destroyed several times in the past century, also earlier history. Again, that's no apologetics for what Putin may be doing, but it should lead us to have a rational perspective on the relationship between these forces in the world.
Yeah, he later went on, to be fair to him, to talk about how TTIP and TPP are not even trade agreements, that they are basically investor rights agreements, to his credit. But he's strange fruit, though, isn't he, Chomsky? Again, obviously very bright, being very critical of Israel, as has his good friend Norman Finkelstein, whom I've interviewed as well several times. But I've never understood how a guy like Chomsky can get things up to a point or understand things up to a point, but not get it entirely. I don't believe that. He's too intelligent for that. Yet decides, well, this is how far I'm prepared to go. Now, there are people listening to this programme, I'm well aware of them. By the way, my mouse is doing me no good at the moment. It's not working very well. There are people who listen to this programme who believe that Chomsky knows exactly what he's doing, and that he's the very definition of what we've come to call controlled opposition. Strange fruit, strange fruit. Been interested in the case of the Isle of Wight man. I've been talking to David about this, actually. I was speaking to David over the weekend about it. John Platt, who refused to pay a £120 fine for taking his daughter on an unauthorised term time holiday. Well, he won, of course, you will know by now, a High Court ruling in his favour. Magistrates had ruled that he had no case to answer, as overall his daughter had attended school regularly. This is an important story, I reckon, this. The Isle of Wight Council had actually said to the High Court, they'd asked the High Court to clarify whether a 7-day absence amounted to a child failing to attend regularly. Here's an interesting exchange between John Platt and Jonathan Baker. Now, Baker is from the Isle of Wight Council, obviously disappointed that the High Court ruled in favour of the father's right to take his daughter out of school in term time. The interview, or the exchange, was on the BBC. I found it interesting. Have a listen to this if I can get it up there. Yes, here we go.
I think the Department of Education and schooling in this country is in a bit of a mess because we simply don't know what the situation is. Can you take your child out of school? When can you take your child out of school? Should you be able to take your child out of school without any control? As I say, it's clearly shown that there's a link between attainment and attendance at school, and that link has not apparently been accepted by the court, and I fear massive disruption to schooling across the country.
No, but the thing that stops parents taking their kids out of school, Jonathan, isn't the fear of your £60 truancy penalty notice. It's the fear of the damage it'll do to their kids' education. That's the restraining factor on parents. They're smart. They can work this out themselves. They know if I pull my kids out of school every time we go on holiday in term time and their attendance falls to 70, 60%, my child is going to suffer. So they don't do that. But when circumstances demand and they want to take their child out of school, they should be able to, and that's what the High Court has said. An unauthorised holiday of itself cannot amount to a breach of the legislation. It might, but it might be 3 or 4 weeks out of an academic year.
So just lastly, are you going to be taking your children out of school next year during term time?
I'm getting married in Santorini in 18 days. My kids are coming. They will not miss a day of school. The last time my kids went on holiday was to Barcelona a few weeks ago, and it was in half term and they didn't miss a day of school. I try as much as possible to take my kids on holiday when it's the school holidays, like everybody else. But sometimes you can't do that for whatever reason. And this mass fining, is there really, Jonathan, in all seriousness, 100,000 parents in this country who are so criminally incompetent as parents that it warrants dragging them to court? Do you think that, is that your assessment of parents in this country?
It was a great decision by the High Court, but obviously the state isn't happy about it, and it's planning on, finding a way, not so much finding a way around it, but returning to the status quo whereby they say to parents, you can't take your children out in term time. Look, it's tyrannical. Our producer, Claire Calvey, has been getting letters from her school, the school where her children attend, and the letters have been talking about fines for lateness. If you happen to be a few minutes late, you're going to be fined £50-60 a time by the local authority. This is tyranny. It's tyranny. It's not an exaggeration to say that. How dare a local authority send letters out to parents to say, we're going to start fining you when your child is late for school. There's something called life, isn't there? Where shit happens. Where you're walking out the door and you can't find your wallet or your handbag. Or you forget something and you have to return to the house as you're rushing off to work in the mad, crazy life that we all live now. They're saying that, I tell you what, you better not be late anymore bringing your children to our institution because we're going to start fining you. It's insane. And they just put up with it, parents. Don't they? And this is how the system endures. People don't do anything about it. They bitch and they piss and they moan. But do sweet FA about it. And I came across this on the BBC. It might sound nothing. It might sound a silly story, but it isn't. It isn't. Dundee, which is in Scotland. I had to look it up. I didn't. There's a primary school there, and pupils have been asked to sign a fair play contract if they want to play football at break times. Fort Hill Primary in Broughty Ferry, or in Broughty, it looks like Broughty Ferry. Fort Hill Primary School gave children a 17-clause contract to sign to play football at break times because of issues which were carried into teaching time. Clauses include promising not to foul other players, not to gloat, and promising to keep up schoolwork. Pupils breaking the contract will face temporary football bans. Other clauses in the contract include agreeing to use supportive and encouraging language and not to elbow or shoulder charge. And a spokesperson for Dundee City Council said the letter has been issued by the primary to families following a number of issues that have occurred this year during break and lunchtime football games. It is insane. It's beyond Orwellian. Programming the children to accept from the earliest age that you must get permission from the authoritarian state institution, which is your school. You must get permission to do something as harmless as have a kickabout during lunchtime. Unbelievable. But it carries on because we bitch about it. What are you doing, Richie? Well, I'll tell you what I'm doing, will I? Because I'm getting these tweets. I've just had an email from somebody. What are you doing? I'll tell you what I'm fucking doing. I'm not putting my children in school. When the future Mrs. Allen and I ever get around to having children, they will not go through the school system. However many wonderful teachers there are, and there are, I've met so many of them here, wonderful people who want to do the best for children. The system is drowning them all. No child of ours will ever attend a school in this country or anywhere else. I will teach our children. I'm more than qualified to do it. How to read, how to write. And they'll spend most of their time outdoors learning about the world. Not holding a smartphone or a tablet, or not being told to sign contracts to play football. Madness. Utter madness. I mean, it really is. I should have disabled those sounds, shouldn't I? Oh, that drove me mad, that, when I saw that. And moving on to this is very serious. I left it till pretty late on. This is very serious. We've been covering this during the week. The Queen's speech on Wednesday is going to talk about more intensive action to help children in care in England, and it's promising better support for those leaving care. This is a report by the BBC. Have a listen to this.
The Prime Minister's keen to demonstrate that his current focus on the EU referendum isn't at the expense of the domestic political agenda. At his party conference last year, he promised an all-out assault on poverty. So he's likely to be judged on whether this week's Queen's speech will transform his rhetoric into reality. In an article for the Sunday Times, David Cameron is associating himself with one issue in particular: improving opportunities for children in care and for those leaving care. He'll promise that they'll have a mentor until the age of 25, that social workers will be better regulated, and that he'll tip the balance of the system towards enabling children to be adopted permanently. Labour says cuts in support for students and working families have already harmed life chances. Ian Watson, BBC News.
Tip the balance of the system to allow children to be adopted more easily. That should scare the absolute shit out of any man or woman who's about to have a child and who might be going through some difficulties. They might be unwell. They might have had depression. They might be struggling a bit. They might have had addiction issues. They're coming for your children. This is unbelievable. David Icke is all over this, has been for years. There's a lot on davidicke.com/headlines today about that. I mean, let me read you this. This is the Sunday Times. The government is to pass new laws to encourage adoption. In a bid to improve the chances of children in social care in England. Writing in the Sunday Times, David Cameron promised zero tolerance of state failure around social care and a new covenant for those leaving care. New laws will encourage the permanent adoption of children, wait for this, even when it overrides family ties. Shall I read that again? This is straight from the pig fucker's mouth himself. New laws will encourage the permanent adoption of children even when it overrides family ties. How has this affected me that much? I don't have children. Just imagine for a minute. You know all about this through davidicke.com, through this programme. I reckon 95 out of 100 people taken at random anywhere in the country have no idea that 20,000 children a year are taken through the secret family courts, the vast majority of whom should not be taken from their families. We had John Hemming on the other night reiterating his warning to women who are hearing this tyrannical stuff from their local authorities to get out of the country. Where are we living? Senior politicians saying, get the fuck out before they take your child. Can't say that any other way. New law, says Cameron, will encourage the permanent adoption of children even when it overrides family ties. It's tyrannical. The man should be in prison for the rest of his life. Not for thought crimes. Let him think that all he wants. But the minute he attempts to put in place legislation to allow that, he is basically party to kidnapping. Isn't he? This is going to be outlined in the Queen's speech on Wednesday. I'm just going to leave that one there because I can't add anything to that. I really can't. On schools fining people for being late. Claire, my producer, has tweeted me to say, not to mention getting letters telling me that 93% attendance is unacceptable. Sean MacDonald quite rightly brings up the Named Person Act and says David Cameron would have had his child taken away. That's the child, of course, he abandoned in a pub. Dean Smith says, I was fined, Richie, for taking my son out of school. I have never paid and I heard no more about it. It's extortion and they know it. I'm surprised, Dean, is that you didn't get a letter warning you that enforcement agencies would be around to... enforcement agents would be around to force you to comply by stealing your belongings. Bailiffs, they're called. The local authorities have stopped calling them bailiffs. They now call them enforcement agents. It's all very Judge Dredd, isn't it? 2000 and whatever AD, isn't it? Fucking cheek of them. Imagine. You're living in a free society. You are free. This is a democracy. We're sending enforcement agents around because you didn't pay a fine. Kim says on Twitter, I was adopted, Richie, and I wouldn't have wanted to be handed over to Cameron's friends. She says something else. Because of the laws of libel, Kim, I'm not going to read that out. But I understand where you're coming from. Madness. Sin, good morning. Sin is in Greece. That Cindy is in Greece. It affects us without children because in a better world we'd have children, she says. Yes. Although, to be honest, the reason why at 41 I'm not yet a daddy, Cindy, is because Caroline and myself have been very nomadic. We've moved around the world quite a bit. Natalie, good morning. Those asking others, what are you doing, or doing bugger all themselves, made me angry too, that question. Yeah. That's right. Do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to leave you on a positive note. It's 5 minutes to the top of the. I'm going to leave you on a positive note. If you've listened to the programme for long enough, if you've been around for a while, or if you've known me in some of my past incarnations, you will know that as a teenager, particularly in my mid to late teens, I campaigned against capital punishment with a number of different anti-capital punishment groups around the world. And I used to write to very many men and women who were on death row. Some of them got off. Some of them were given a reprieve. Some of them had their death sentence commuted to life imprisonment. And one or two people whom I knew very well were executed. Pfizer, one of the most corrupt companies in the world, so don't start shouting at me now. I know it is. However, said on Friday it was blocking use of its drugs in lethal injections, which means all federally approved drug makers whose medications could be used for executions have put them off limits. Pfizer makes its products to enhance and save the lives of the patients we serve. Consistent with these values, Pfizer strongly objects to the use of its products as lethal injections for capital punishment. That's a statement made on Pfizer's website on Friday. Pfizer strongly objects to the use of its products as lethal injections for capital punishment. The company's announcement had limited immediate impact. Its action is an enhancement of a previous policy that follows Pfizer's $15.23 billion purchase of Lake Forest, Illinois-based Hospira Incorporated last year. Hospira had previously prohibited the use of its drugs in capital punishment, as have other drug makers. Pfizer shares are about $33 a share at the moment. It had no impact on that. Some of the human rights organisations like Reprieve are delighted. And a woman called Mea Foa, who is a spokeswoman for Reprieve, she said Pfizer's actions cement the pharmaceutical industry's opposition to the misuse of medicines. Pfizer's announcement was unlikely to have much effect on executions, which have slowed in recent years as drug makers' prohibition on the drugs took effect. Yes, the rate of executions in terms of them being carried out has definitely slowed down a bit, I know this. But it's good because people might talk about the rights and wrongs of capital punishment. American people who live in states like Texas, like Tennessee, Louisiana, other states which regularly put people to death, they might have the conversation about it. But I wanted to play you a clip. Dennis McGuire was executed in Ohio a few years ago, not so long ago. And it was horrendous what happened to him. The execution went wrong and his father suffered terribly. Dennis McGuire suffered terribly. It took him nearly 19 minutes to die. It was very distressing for everybody, particularly him, of course, the condemned. But I want you to listen to his son, having watched that, talk about the reality of observing an execution being carried out. Have a listen.
Yesterday I watched the state of Ohio kill my dad. I witnessed his execution along with my wife and my sister. It is difficult for me to talk about what happened. Shortly after the warden buttoned his jacket to signal start the execution, my dad began gasping and struggling to breathe. I watched his stomach heave. I watched him try to sit up against the straps on the gurney. I watched him repeatedly clench his fist. It appeared to me he was fighting for his life, but suffocating. The agony and terror of watching my dad suffocate to death lasted more than 19 minutes. It was the most awful moment in my life to witness my dad's execution. No one should die the way my dad did, no matter the circumstances.
Well, no country can call itself civilised. No state could call itself civilised when it puts people to death in the manner. First of all, puts people to death, full stop, but in the manner with which they do that. It's staggering to me. It really is staggering. I think the last execution was in the 1960s here, wasn't it? 1961 was the last person to be hanged, a woman called Ruth Ellis. I think so. Might have been the last execution. I could be wrong. I used to know all this stuff off by heart. But good news, if they're finding it more difficult to execute people in America, they might have a conversation about that and they might abolish the death penalty. Look, that's it for Sunday View. I've run over time. That's okay. I don't mind that. Thanks for listening to it. Do stay with davidicke.com/headlines. Lots and lots of really important information on there and terrific breakdown and analysis of the big news stories of the day. I'll be back with you tomorrow live at 8 p.m. BST. Jordan Maxwell is my guest tomorrow. We will have Laura Eisenhower on the programme this week coming as well. We're going to have an open door or an open mic almost programme on Wednesday for parents whose children have been stolen by the state. That's going to be major, that, on Wednesday this week. I think David Shaler is going to join us this week as well. And I got to speak to Claire about that. Lots happening on the programme. Stay in touch with our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/The Richie Allen Show. And of course, we're on YouTube as well. Thanks to Simon and Aaron for all their help and Claire for production. That's it for Sunday View. Thanks again for listening to it. Look after yourselves and one another. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And when this programme appears on social media, on podcast and on YouTube, please do me a favour and share it. And we do obviously require your continued financial support. If you can support the programme, go to redistribution.co.uk. That's my website, redistribution.co.uk. There are PayPal details and bank account details there. If you can support us, please do. If you can't, help out in the ways I just described there a second ago. Look after yourselves. Bye. Take it easy. Bye now.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIcke.com.